Hello, this is Michał Kłakowski from Software Sales 101. It's almost weekend, it's a beautiful weather, but before we get there, I'd like to talk to you about a super important thing, which is how do you know you're relevant to your customer? How do you know you're going to close your sale? There's many methods to do that. So often I hear, well, I've sent out the offer and I hope for good. Hope is not a strategy. There are much better ones, and today we're going to start from a very simple one, which is called three whys. Three whys are three why questions which help you to assess the relevance, the value that you're bringing to your customer. And they are: why should your customer change anything? Why do it now? And why do it with you? Answering those questions, it's worth to be honest. You're building your own plan, you're building your own pipeline. So you need to understand honestly the probability that you are going to make it. Avoid being hyper optimistic or selling to yourself. That is not the purpose of this exercise. You need to think as your customer advocate, as their friend, who needs to get them from where they are now to the point where they want to be. So let's start answering the questions. First one is, why do anything? Customers are businesses and they're making money on their own. There's essentially two things interesting to them, which is be able to make more money or save the costs that they're having. And from this perspective, most gain areas they would consider are revolving around that. There's four main categories that you can typically think of. Number one, cost savings. For example, customer is consolidating the licenses of the competition or is switching to the more affordable alternative that you're selling, or is automating a manual process, meaning that it can repurpose the labor, which is presumably more expensive, to something else. Number two is cost avoidance. That is a close sibling of cost savings. Sometimes it's referred to as soft savings versus hard savings. Cost avoidance is, for example, what would you do to avoid hiring more people, which by the way might not be available for you to hire. What would you do if you would, how could you avoid building the piece of software yourself, which is likely more risky and more expensive? How are you going to adapt to a new regulation, which is mandatory to you, but could be costly? Next category of reasons to change is risk mitigation. It's again a close sibling of cost avoidance, and that relates to something that you know is happening, but it's too hard to say how much exactly does it cost, so probability kicks in. And risk is value multiplied by probability. So when you think about it, is, for example, it could be a regulatory fine, which is coming if you don't do certain things, or it could be a staff churn. What if your key people leave? How can you mitigate that risk, because you can't prevent that entirely? Or how can you deal with your project delays? That would all fall into the risk mitigation category. And finally, last but definitely not least, there is an added opportunity. How can you, using the software, do things faster, sell more to new or the same customers, how you can reach customers that were not available to you so far, or perhaps sell additional value to your existing customers. Next question number two, is why now? Honest answer to the why now question requires to think about the next best alternative. What would happen if you couldn't or wouldn't want to buy the software that is on the table? And that needs to be an external reason, in my experience. Many people say, oh, a good compelling reason for the customer to buy software right here, right now, is because I gave them the great offer only this quarter. But you don't know your situation next quarter. You don't know the pressure you're going to be under, or your management. So that is not a good compelling reason. Besides, it does not make you a great friend with your customer. A good external reason is identical to the answer to the question of what happens if you don't do anything right now. and how much would that cost you? And then finally, the question is, what about the competitive differentiation? So competitive differentiation is the reason that the customer wants to go with you. That's a match of your offer and their challenge. How do they go together? It could be about your product. It could be about the organization you're in and the easiness of doing business with you. It could be about trade partner. And eventually, this thing becomes super important at the very beginning of the sales cycle and at the very end of it, because this is where your customer perceives the biggest risk in the sale, and they need to mitigate that by understanding they are in the right place with the right people. This, in a nutshell, is a simplest possible framework to understand if you're relevant for your customer and measure the value that you provide. Answer 3 questions: why do anything, why now, and why with you, and you start mapping the gap of what you don't know. In next episodes, we're going to cover more advanced return on investment calculation methods, as well as more advanced methods of mapping where you are in a deal, like MEDIC. Stay with me and subscribe.